All right, welcome to today's lecture. We'll be talking Microsoft Azure today and doing the introduction to how Microsoft Azure works. For CS339 and for Data 539, we'll be using Microsoft Azure as our platform of choice. And all of our labs and homeworks and anything else, we'll be talking specifically about this platform. While we are talking specifically about this platform, a lot of the general concepts will apply to other cloud platforms that are out there, Google, AWS, or whatever. But we're doing a deep dive in this class just on the Azure platform. So we're going to start with some basic introduction knowledge. Here are the SLOs. You should be able to describe the basic Azure cloud platform. You should be able to use the pricing tools to accurately estimate cloud costs. You should be able to describe the global data center setup for Azure services and describe some of the free services that are available for the Azure platform. So this is a quote here. Azure is a cloud platform with more than 200 products and services designed to help you bring new solutions to life to solve today's challenges and create the future. Use the tools and frameworks of your choice to build, run, and manage applications across cloud, hybrid, and edge environments. Azure is going to have a lot of different types of services available. We've talked about infrastructure as a service, IaaS. We've talked about platform as a service, PaaS, and software as a service, as well as SaaS. You'll be able to find all three of these in the Azure cloud platform. And when it refers to the 200 products and services and designed to help you, these are talking about Microsoft specific services that are set up on here. There also is a marketplace of services that other companies are trying to sell to you that they have integrated inside of Azure and made it easy for you to use. So there's probably more there as well that you can buy into and run. So Azure, as I said, is a mixture of the IaaS, the PaaS, and the SaaS services provided by Microsoft. Because it is a Microsoft cloud platform, there are many integrations out there into existing Windows Server and Active Directory technologies. When you sign up for Azure, by default, you will get something called the Entra ID, which is an account management software that will be used within Azure. This is an extension of the classic Active Directory that has been used in organizations for years, and something that we'll talk about more in this class in the upcoming weeks. You have other things that kind of combine together as well. Azure file shares are a really cool extension to the regular file shares that you would find on Windows servers today. It allows you to synchronize both local file servers and remote file servers and keep them all in sync together, and it works really well. And additionally, they're right now pushing the Azure Stack HCI, which is Azure code locally on premises managed in the Azure program. So if you have servers and you want to use the portal because it's a great management platform, but you have servers on-prem, you can actually pay to have it's a different operating system than Windows Server, but you can pay to install that in your environment, and then your servers will show up in Azure and you'll be able to deploy to them just like you would be deploying to the cloud, but you can choose whether to deploy on-prem or to the cloud, the public cloud area as well. So really cool integrations there. As far as services, what services are out there? There are some Microsoft services that are available for use in Azure. The Microsoft file servers, SQL servers. Obviously, SQL is a huge, software that Microsoft provides, and you can use it directly within Azure as well. But they also have NoSQL servers as well. If you're more of a NoSQL type of person, they have a really nice NoSQL Cosmo database is what they call it. And that's really good and easy to use as well. There are lots of popular open source technologies that are hosted and operated by Microsoft. This again is removing the middleware pieces from your management and letting Microsoft manage that as well. containers, whether that is done through Docker or Kubernetes. If you want to use containers, you can let Microsoft manage your Kubernetes cloud, for example. We'll talk more about containers later this semester too. Classic web services, whether that's Nginx, Apache, or whatever, just classic web hosting. Databases, Postgres, MySQL, etc. These are all open source software technologies that Microsoft has packaged up and made available for use. And then also like things like Python, PowerShell, Node.js, serverless functions. So if I just need a web API where I hit this URL and give it this data and I want it to run some code, we can set that up as well. And there's lots of additional services that are provided and supported by third-party services as well. So when we talk about Azure in particular, Azure is a worldwide platform for public cloud hosting. Microsoft has invested in regions and data centers all over the globe, and basically built out the infrastructure to interconnect these things with high bandwidth links, and basically have a point of presence all over the world. Why did they do it all over the world? Well, latency. In order to get the best performance, you want to be close to where your servers are, or you want your customers to be close to where your servers are. So in the US, Microsoft has built out several different locations, and they've named these regions appropriately, and placed them in different states around the United States. So close to us, the near site closest to Kelvin is currently the North Central region, which is in Illinois, the Chicagoland area. But besides that, you have central locations over in Iowa, South Central in Texas. On the East Coast, you have East US and East US 2 in Virginia. And on the West Coast, you have stuff in California, Washington, and Wyoming as well. So depending on where you're deploying your stuff, where your offices might be, you can usually find one that's not too far away from where you physically are located. And you do that to keep your latency down. But that's not it for as far as where Microsoft has data centers. If you are a worldwide company and you want to focus your data centers in different areas, you'll notice that there's a lot of different data centers in in and around Europe. There's some over here by Qatar, in India, South Africa, Brazil, um, Southeast Asia, getting into China here, and South Korea and Japan. And then what you can't see behind me right now is underneath in Australia as well. There's some available there as well. So depending on where you want to be, you should be able to find a data center that is hopefully nearby you. In these data centers, a lot of these regions will offer what are called zonal disaster recovery, for DR, otherwise known as DR. These zones are multiple fully isolated, fully independent data centers within a geographic area. So for example, let's pick Chicago here. I have a data center that's in that north central region. It has its own servers, it has its own hardware, it has its own networking, it has its own storage, it has its own internet links, it has its own air conditioning, it has its own power, it has its own data links, internet links coming inside of it. That is one data center in the Chicagoland area. 15 miles away, you will have another data center that is a replica of that has all these things. And then 15 miles in a different direction, you'll have a third one that will have a replica of all these things as well. And this is done so that within a region, I can share data. It's called a disaster recovery zone, and that data, my virtual machine configuration data, I can share that between sites. My actual data that I'm storing on a hard disk, I can synchronize those bits from point A to point B. And I can remotely stripe them. I can synchronize them between the zones. I can use all three zones simultaneously. Whatever my particular disaster recovery method is, I'll be able to do within these zones. And the whole point to this is to protect against a single data center failure within that geographic region. So um, it's a little bit hard to think about, but what happens if a bomber goes and bombs one of these locations, blows up an entire data center? I want to avoid that. What happens if a tornado takes out one of these data centers, or a hurricane if you're near a coast, or something like that, a volcano erupting? Who knows? What if some natural act of God destroys a data center? Well, I want to be able to, within that same region, be able to fail over to another site. Um, However, not necessarily all resources that you can do in Azure are able to be auto failed over between the zones. So you do have to keep in mind, what resource do I have? Can I auto fail this over? And then second of all, do I want to? And this is also something that is a paid feature. If I want to have this auto replicating stuff, if I want automatically replicating 24/7 between zones in this disaster recovery zone, I'm going to pay for that. It's going to be more expensive than just saying my data only exists in one data center. And if that data center gets taken out, well, then my data is probably gone, at least until Microsoft can get a backup running. So what you pay for um, is, it's up to you to kind of figure out what you pay for. And just to watch out, just don't assume that because there is a resource, it will automatically be zone capable and be able to be set up in that way. As far as regions are concerned, there are other regions that are available. I did briefly talk about this. The US government, if you go to work for the US government, there are several regions that are only for the Department of Defense. Um, Canada, Mexico, there's regions near the US if you want something outside of the country. And then global regions in Europe, Asia Pacific, etc. So when you host your data, you want to make sure that you keep in mind a couple of things. What are the resources that are available at a region? Just because Microsoft has a region doesn't mean that every single resource, every single one of the 200 different services that they offer are supported at a various region. You might find that some regions only have newer, or some regions might have the latest and greatest hardware, but they don't implement that in all the regions. So you're going to have to watch out where you run stuff. Latency of ping. I've mentioned this a few times, but ping is a big deal. If you're just searching, if you're just hosting a web browser, if it's in the US, it's probably going to be fast enough. If you're doing some high performance stuff with data and you're trying to share files over a WAN link, over an internet link, latency is a big deal. It's going to slow down significantly. Every like 2 milliseconds you add, it's going to cut significantly how much data you can get through. And lastly, data at rest restrictions. Do you have requirements as to where your data is stored? If you are storing data for a US government contract that is required to be stored only on US soil, you cannot store this in Mexico. You cannot store this in Canada or in Europe. Your cloud provider should be able to give you guarantees as to where your data is stored. The cheapest data storage might be stored elsewhere in the world. You don't know. So make sure that when you're buying your storage, you actually know where that's going to be stored. Um, and I mentioned that just for US government, but you also have things like HIPAA, the healthcare that might run into this, credit card processing industry might also run into that, and there might be more as well that you might run into. As far as pricing is concerned, when we're talking Azure, we're talking really three different pricing structures, depending on what we're trying to do. The classic one that most everybody starts out with is just pay as you go. This is I need something, they have capacity, I'm going to pay for it, I'm going to get billed monthly for what I use. And these services can be billed down to the second or down to the single input output operation to my storage disk, for example. This is a good way of doing things if you're not sure that you want to commit to a long-term commitment. But usually, if you pay as you go, you get it would be a higher rate. Azure also allows you to use reservation services as well, which is where you would sign up for a 1 or 3 year contract for a particular resource. So let's say, for example, I know that for this academic year, I'm going to be hosting the R Studio server in Azure for computer science and data science. I could pay as you go and be billed, let's say, $100 a month for that service. Or I could say, yeah, I'm going to use it all year. I'm going to buy a 1 year term contract, and then my cost goes down significantly. Azure has benefits because they know how much committed income they can do, so they can better plan how much hardware they have. And because of that, they give you a great deal on it. Usually, this is about 40% of what you pay for pay as you go. So instead of costing $100 a month, now this would only cost me $40 a month. So if you know that you're going to be using something for a long time, the reservation services can be very useful. And there's always free services as well. Some of Microsoft services have free services up to a certain usage level every single month. And there's also some initial 12-month free services where you can get some free services for 12 months right after you signed up, just so you can get your feet wet with these services. And there's a link there that you can go into this and find out a little bit more. But when we're talking about Azure, you are paying for everything. Let's say I want to do IaaS and I want to set up a virtual machine. What am I paying for? Well, the first thing I'm paying for is the virtual machine. It has a certain amount of fixed CPU and RAM, typically like 1 core, 4 gigs of RAM, or 2 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. And that's going to cost a certain amount per month. Just for that CPU, let's say that 2 CPU cores, 8 gigs of RAM. That's probably going to be about 70, $75 a month. That's what it is. You will then have a storage drive, whether that's a hard drive or whether that's an SSD that is attached to your virtual machine. And that is going to be billed per gigabyte. All of these are going to have a certain performance level associated with them that is done in IOPS, or input output operations per second. And the higher the IOPS, the higher the price is going to be. The bigger the disk, the higher the price is going to be. Third, you're going to be paying for internet and IP address. So if I want to host a public service, I need an IP address. Specifically, IPv4 addresses are scarce. You're going to end up paying about $4 to $5 a month for an IPv4 address to use. And you're going to be paying for your bandwidth to and from the internet, the egress or the ingress, and that's what's behind my face right now, ingress. That cost you're going to be paying per gigabyte, and it's something like 10 cents a gigabyte of internet bandwidth in and out of the data centers here. So you end up paying for a lot. And some of these things are variable. So how do you estimate your costs? Well, price calculators. This is very important. Price your solution out. Azure has a fantastic pricing calculator that you can go to and try this out. And I'm actually going to click into it here a second. All right, so this is our basic pricing calculator. And let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger here for you. And we are going to just do a virtual machine right now. So let's add a virtual machine to my estimate. And then I'm going to click view. All right, so you'll see that you're prompted to do a lot of things like what region I'm going to be in. I'm going to choose North Central US. I'm going to do a Linux one running Ubuntu, and it's going to be the standard tier. And you'll notice that by default, it gave me a VM here of two vCPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, and 50 gigs of temporary storage. And that is going to cost me 10 cents an hour. Okay. I could go into here a little bit and let's say these are the options that I'm getting here. I really like the DAS ones. Let's see if I can find those. D2 D2ASV5 is what I want. D2ASV5. You'll notice that this one is 8.6 cents an hour, and it has 0 gigs of temporary storage. So let's say I'm going to run one of these virtual machines for 730 hours, pay as you go. I'm looking at $62.78 a month. Let's also add some disks to this though. Let's add a standard premium SSD, and I'm going to give myself a 512 gig premium SSD. Just the disk alone is going to cost me another $73 a month. And then bandwidth, let's say we're doing internet egress, and I'm going to be transferring 250 gigabytes a month. And now I have 13 gigs or $13 of internet bandwidth as well. So overall, my monthly cost just for that one VM, I'm up to almost $150 a month. Um, yeah, that can be a big deal. That can be a big deal. These costs can add up very quick. However, these are operational expenditures, not capital expenditures. Let's say if I needed to buy a brand new server to do this function and hook it up to my internet connection that I already had at my business. Buying that server, I might spend $5,000 on that server. How many months of service of this particular VM could I get for that $5,000 of capital expenditure that I would have made? Quite a few. So it's kind of you weigh it back and forth as to what you are looking for here. All right, let's go back to this. Because pricing is such a big deal, we have to be able to keep track of that, and so that we don't end up spending way too much on our cloud infrastructure. So Microsoft has several ways of doing this to kind of manage your costs here. When you sign up for Azure, you will have to set up a subscription, and that is basically who is paying for this service. When you set this up, a lot of times you'll just set it up as you are the person that are paying for the service, but you could break this out by department, by organization, by yeah, however you want to internally do this in your business. Sometimes you might have a IT group have a infrastructure, subscription, and they might have a testing subscription, and they might have a marketing subscription for all the marketing folks or whatever, and they are all managed under the same portal, but the resources are deployed per subscription so that the appropriate people will end up paying for the appropriate things. All resources within Azure have the ability to also be tagged. And a tag is basically a text field. It's a label that allows you to logically associate things together. So for example, let's say I have a project. This is a project, a 1-year project to do, I don't know, employee retention, a 1-year employee retention project. And this has a bunch of web resources and stuff like that. It's only going to run for a year. I can label this as project employee retention. And then I can search in my Azure portal for all of these different tags to be able to see which ones are creating costs and which ones are costing money, etc. Within the cost management section of the portal, these tags are very useful, and I highly recommend any sort of resource you deploy in Azure to tag them appropriately for cost reasons. I mentioned the portal, and all of the interactions with the Azure infrastructure are done via the Azure portal. So I'm going to just show you a little bit of that right now, I think. Okay, so I've gone ahead and logged into the Azure portal. When you log into the Azure portal, you will see your recent resources on the list here, and then you'll see all the services that you see up here on the top. So a lot of these will basically be stuff that you've recently used, but it's super easy to see all of them. If I just go to more services, I will see a breakdown by category of all the different things that I can do in the Azure platform. Let's go to compute, for example. I have all these infrastructure as a service things here, disk pools, lab accounts, virtual desktops, virtual machines, VM images, all that sort of stuff, platform as a services, app services, um, VMware stuff, serverless and microservices, container apps, functions app. We'll talk a little bit about these. Moving on, high performance computing, all this kind of stuff. And all the solutions that you can think about are available right here. Databases, SQL, Cosmos DB, that's a NoSQL instance. And the classic open source ones, MariaDB, MySQL, Postgres, etc. So you'll find all of your stuff right there. Um, Highly recommend always going back to home when you're doing things. Cost management, this is another one that you'll probably want to be very familiar with. If you go into cost management, you should be able to see a breakdown of your costs over time. And let me go to the left here, go to cost analysis. And I should be able to see for my particular subscription that I just set up, I should be able to go into my accumulated costs and see how much I have actually accumulated over this month. So my actual cost so far this month has been $7.20. And my accumulated forecast based off of how things went last month would be about 26.81. Again, that's an estimate, but more than likely it's not going to be that much based off of how much I've been using the last couple of days. I think I'm using roughly 40 cents a day right now. Not a big deal. And you can see the breakdown of that as well. If I wanted to actually get into the tags here, I believe that I can filter this. And I'm going to have to figure out where that is. Maybe not in cost analysis. Maybe in resources, and then I can filter. Yeah, then I have tags here available, and I can filter by my tags here. So I believe I set up a tag for some of this stuff for CS339. So you'll notice that I tagged all my stuff with CS339 is equal to true, and you can see where um, how much just my CS339 stuff has actually been used. All right, so that's kind of the basic stuff here. Let me go back to the slideshow. Okay, so Azure, we're talking public cloud. The question of the day is, how do you get to this public cloud? How do I actually utilize this? How do I connect to this public cloud? Um, there are a couple of different ways that you can securely connect to your resources in the Azure cloud. The two real methods that you have is you can actually buy a dedicated internet link. This is where you would buy a dedicated link directly that connects into the Azure global network. And however big that link is, would be your private link to the Azure global network. If you are a big organization and you push lots of bandwidth, this is a fantastic way to, one, securely connect to the Azure cloud, but then two, to avoid internet bandwidth to the Azure cloud by directly using your connection to the Azure cloud. So this is actually like a secondary internet link. You would say, hey, I want a 100 megabit per second direct connection to the Microsoft Azure global network. And they would quote you for that and how much that's going to be and physically pull a fiber optic cable into your location and set that up. It might be worth it. A lot of people, it's not worth it. The other way of doing this would be to set up a site-to-site virtual private network or VPN. You would interface with the Azure cloud over the public internet, and you set up a VPN between your resources in your on-prem location and the Azure cloud, and there as well. Microsoft has VPN terminators in the Azure resources that you can use to set this up, and I would highly recommend doing this. Depending on the bandwidth that you need here as well, there's different tiers of how much that costs. The basic free one, which gives you, I think, only like 10 or 15 megabits per second of bandwidth, is again free. It doesn't cost anything to set that one up. You can continue to use that, or maybe it's even up to 100 megabits per second. And that is probably more than most organizations need unless they are pushing a lot of data. I find that for just external or for internal management, that is perfectly fine for all of my needs for internal management and user authentication, etc. More than enough for what I need it to do. So here is a picture of your classic site-to-site VPN network setup. So let's say I have two on-premise locations here, on-premises site number 1 and on-premises site number 2. And I'm going to move my, oh, sorry about this, folks. Let me move my picture up here. Okay. So in these particular locations here, I've got two sites, site 1 and site 2, and these are the IP ranges that are in use on each of these sites. Site 1 is 10.0.0.0/16 and 10.1.0.0/16. Site 2 has 10.2 and 10.3. All of these I want to connect to my US East organization here. And oops, hopefully. Yeah, I want to connect them to my US East organization, which has the IP addresses at 10.20 and 10.21, all /16 networks. So in there, I would deploy a VPN. I would deploy a VPN gateway over in my US East region, set it up with a public IP address, and then from each of my on-premise locations, I would set up a VPN tunnel, more than likely an IPsec VPN tunnel between that site and my VPN gateway. This would allow both of these to securely connect and consume resources, private resources within the US East region as well. Highly recommended because not all of your services are going to need to be exposed to the public internet. And even if they are exposed to the public internet, you might not want to expose your management interfaces, your SSH, your remote desktop connection. Those interfaces you might not want to expose to the public internet for security reasons and just keep them exposed internally, privately as well. This is another example of a point to site or a P2S VPN. This could also be called the road warrior scenario where you have a whole bunch of clients. Let's say your own personal laptop, you as the system administrator are out on the road, you bring your stuff home, you're at a vacation spot, a destination, or you're on a conference somewhere, you need to get into your stuff. You can set up a VPN client on your own laptop or computer at home, and then use that to, excuse me, tunnel into using the VPN gateway as well. So this one here, Site to site, that's the permanent stuff. That's the always on connections between physical locations. The point to site or the road warrior example here is transient clients that kind of dial in or connect as needed from anywhere in the world. And that, I believe, is the introduction to um, Microsoft Azure. So hopefully that was beneficial to you. And I would definitely take time in the upcoming days here to take a look at the portal, log in, and set up your own portal and kind of figure out what's going on with that. Thank you very much, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye-bye.